Hello. Hi, everybody. How is it going? Everything fine? We are here, me and Ricky, like usual, to read my fanfiction about Harry, like every Thursday. And yes, I hope you are well. I hope you had a nice week. I hope I'm gonna be able to speak English today and not to stutter while I read. Ricky very clumsy today. And yeah, so let's start straight away to mention the things I need to mention. And I published this fan fiction on two or three portals, fanfiction.net, Archive of Our Own in English, and EFP in Italian. And you find the chapters also on my website, which is www. My cat, my lovely cat. www.scribblingaloud.wordpress.com. And they are free to download. You can just take them and read them, and you don't have to pay a thing because this is fan fiction. I could be sued if I sell them. What else? You find me also on Instagram, Scribbling Aloud. I don't publish much. I mean, I don't post things. I barely do stories, but I keep people update about my upcoming lives, so it could be useful for that. And what else? I guess we can do a brief recap of what happened the last time we meet. And if I remember properly, yes, we kind of bring up the thing that Lily's birthday is coming near, and consequently Harry's birthday too, because Lily is born a day before Harry. Because of that, obviously the family is not in the best mood possible, especially Harry, that has got very serious problem in handling emotion, especially mourning. So yeah, struggling with that, and then he has been to Hogwarts with Hermione to study books in order to recover the house where the Fidelius charm has been broken. Found out that Hermione's love is not something feeble as he thought before, but it's a very, very strong kind of love. So that was very tough for him, but they decided anyway to pretend that nothing ever happened, and they just decided to keep being friends. Um, Obviously, probably this is not the wisest thing to do, but this is just my personal opinion. But well, this is what they decided to do, I guess, because in some ways both of them are kind of weak in many aspects. And we had the last chapter where we found out what being a villa means. So Victoire had been attacked by the male member of the family, but fortunately there was Ginny, so nothing bad happened. And Ron was there. So now we left them in Ron's house. So Harry and Ron, we will have a confrontation in the next chapters. Um, I really like that confrontation, and in the Italian version, it came out very, very nicely indeed. I hope I will be able to do the same with the English one. I hope I won't stutter, and I will give the proper, feeling of it. Hopefully. So yeah, and the last chapter we will read tonight, there will be Luna as well, and I really love how I characterized her. I think it's perfect. I think it's right, but you will let me know. So I guess we can start with chapter 37. I knew already about Victoire. An hour later, he was sitting with his back against the bedroom's door, giving some eyes wrapped in a rag on his cheek, where 5 red fingers were starting to show clearly. Come on, Ginny, open the door. Ted and Victoire were already gone. When she emerged from the shed, her clothes were back in order, and only red eyes testified what had just happened. but the mere presence of her had the effect of creating emptiness. James and Albus had scattered out quickly without even saying goodbye, one scared to fall in the spiderweb of the villa effect once again, and the other terrified out of his wits by puberty approaching. Ron had backed as far away as possible, retreating to a corner of the room and staring intensely at his gilly water. Harry had retreated likewise to the opposite corner, fixing his attention with an unnatural interest to the bookshelves, wondering when he would have found the courage to look at her again. Victoire said goodbye in a small voice, keeping close tightly to Ted's side, who was still reassuring her with caresses. Ron and Harry mumbled an unsteady parting, and the only one approaching was Rose, who, with a childish wish to sympathize, kissed her on the cheek. She had always admired her beauty as Lily had done, but now, for the first time, she had started to understand that an imperfect beauty surrounded by friends as they were, it was much better than her solitary striking perfection. Harry had spent the next half an hour entreating Ginny to open the door without result, no sound coming from the other side. She had thrusted the pillow and the duvet out of the door, though, as a clear message of where he wasn't going to sleep that night. Ron appeared in front of him. He was still there. Harry, all taken by his task of trying to speak with Ginny, had completely forgot about his presence. The storm had burned out, however. There was only a calm sea of resentment. Ron knocked on the door. Ginny! I'm sorry, wrong voice. Ginny, give him a break, would you? It's not the poor guy's fault, and you know it. Harry stood up, torn between the urge of kicking him and thankfulness for helping in his cause. These colliding feelings showed themselves in a sullen expression that was a bit of a compromise between the two. Let me talk to her, Ron said to him. Thanks, he muttered through clenched teeth unwillingly, politeness having the better on his instinct. No problem, mate. I'm not your mate. Okay, just no problem then, without mate. He got back in the living room, still in his surliness. Rose was alone, sitting on the sofa, her nose plunged in a big forbidding book by the title History of House Elf Slavery Through the Centuries. Through the Centuries. Hermione's daughter, through and through. He sat beside her, determined not to let her leave the house without having regained her confidence. But the task wasn't going to be easy. She flickered a nervous glance on him and returned to her book. To break the ice, he asked her what she was reading, at which she showed him the cover without uttering a word, and retrieved her occupation. He slumped his back against the sofa and casually let a sentence flutter in midair. I had an house elf once. Her eyes, formerly moving back and forth on the pages, stopped suddenly, and she glanced at him quickly. His name was Scratcher. Another furtive glance, and I was friend with the house elf too. The book seemed less and less interesting all of a sudden. His name was Dobby. I know about Dobby, she exclaimed, finally forgetful of her book. I've seen the Grey Shell Cottage. Mom told me about him. He was a free elf. You tricked his owner in freeing him, she continued, all excited. Harry smiled and nodded. He wondered fleetingly if Hermione had ever told her daughter about being tortured in the Malfoy's mansion and what Dobby's role had been in the rescue. She told me you dig that grave with your hands without using magic. Harry's smile faltered, remembering that moment, a death after another, tracing his path until Voldemort defeats. What about Kreacher? Did you free him? I didn't. Did you keep him as a slave? She spat the question in disgust, her expression so severe that, despite her unlikeness, he could clearly see Hermione in her demeanor, and sniggered. At which she flushed angrily. Before she would start patronizing him in an Hermione-like manner, he explained about Kreacher. After the battle, when it didn't really matter anymore about Kreacher keeping the Order of the Phoenix secret, Harry had hinted him about the possibility of being freed, but only that hint caused almost a stroke in the already elderly elf. Therefore, Harry hadn't dared to approach the subject again. Kreacher had been happy to stay at Hogwarts under his request and had lived still some years. When too old to keep working any longer, he and Ginny had brought him home with them, caring for him until death took him away only a few days later. House elves didn't survive long when incapable to work. Kreacher had expressed the wish of being beheaded, his head stuffed and affixed on the wall in 12 Grimmauld Place, together with his ancestors. But Harry, despite feeling guilty not granting this last wish, couldn't bring himself to do it. It seemed too ghastly and comported as well having to perform some dark magic which utterly repulsed him. In the end, to placate his guilt and trying to do something that could make amends, he hired a wizard painter and asked him to create Kreacher's portrait just beside Sirius' mother's one. It had been a very happy thought of him. Kreacher was overjoyed, and Sirius' mother had started to be less obnoxious whenever some house noise would reach her ears, too occupied in ordering Kreacher about. All of this was explained to Rose, that simmered down under the influx of the tale. She slumped back against the sofa too, her skinny legs swinging lazily while she listened. You have been nice to him. I tried my best. She was silent, flicking pensively the pages of her heavy book. Harry decided to speak about what had just happened to understand if Ron had indeed declared him in her eyes. Rose, did your dad explain to you about before in the garden? She nodded. Dad told me that men are beasts and to mistrust them all, except him. And after a moment, as a second thought, and Albus. What the heck? Is this how Ron educates his daughter? He was about to speak in an attempt to be included in the list, when she spoke again. But I knew already about Victoire. How? I've seen how you and all my other uncles avoid her. And at school, I've seen some boys acting very stupidly when she was present. I asked her, and she told me about the villa thing, she said, slowing her talk as she was proceeding. And I made some researches in the library. Ron's face and Hermione's mind. She threw a fearful glance to him, and faltering, she added, in the restricted section too. Ron's face, Hermione's mind, and Ron's mischievousness. Such a combo. How did you manage? I asked James to lend me the cloak. For God's sake, James, what have you got in the head of your? Although, after consideration, he realized that receiving the cloak from Dumbledore, the first thing he had done had been sneaking in the restricted session too. So he shut himself up. He gulped, afraid of the turn the conversation was taking. What did you find out? She didn't answer straight away, her eyes lowering on her book. Her legs had completely stopped swinging. Villa are not completely human. They use this power to allure men and make them their slaves. They can transform in very powerful creatures, though, so they don't run the risk to be overcome. But elf villa are rare. They have the power to attract men, but not the strength. They cannot transform. And in some cases, happened what is happened today. And she stopped, closing her book and crouching slightly on it, with her gaze lost in front of her. Like wars, she added, and after a second, in a whisper, that's why the book was in the restricted section. Harry was aghast. This was the danger of letting kids run amok, free of messing around. And he found himself tempted to write to McGonagall straight away to enforce the spells around that section. My God, there is even the recipe for the dangerous polyjuice potion there, ready to be taken and used by any groupie. They just needed to find out a way to get around during the night without being caught, find all the ingredients, find a place to brew the potion, make the potion by scrap. Being a bit like Hermione, in short. Or Rose. Or anyway smart enough to do all of that. Nah, fat chance. I'm as safe as in a Gringotts vault. Wait though, didn't I break in one once? I'll speak to McGonagall tomorrow. Did you talk with your mom about this? She shook her head, biting her lips. And now it was his turn to say something reassuring to this girl that at 12 had read disturbing story and see them almost fulfilled under her very eyes not 2 hours before. And he thought that maybe Ron wasn't completely wrong in the advice he had given her. Wouldn't he wanted to give the same to Lily if she would have had the chance to grow older? And moreover, what could she, that had done the unthinkable toward Ginny, and almost the same toward his niece, say to defend men in general, and him in particular? Rose, what you have read is ugly, but you ought to understand the nature of that attraction. We all keep away from her because we don't want to hurt her. Men are not themselves when they act under it. I wasn't myself when I've done it. Am I trying to justify my present or past behavior? And with that, I don't want to defend the offense. Unfortunately, there are also some men that do nasty things, but it's not the general rule. You've got many examples under your eyes of the opposite. See, Ted, how he's caring in regards of Victoire, and your Uncle Bill with Aunt Fleur. And you with Aunt Ginny, she added pensively. You are always very nice to her. I try, he said cautiously. He wasn't the best of example, probably, but for sure he tried. But sometimes I screw up, he added with a sly smile, removing the eyes, revealing the imprint of 5 fingers. She simpered sheepishly, and taking hold of her book again, restarted swinging her legs against the sofa. And that was the end of chapter 37. I hope you like it. I just wanted to make clear that the description of the villa creature I gave, it's my invention. I totally made it up, so there is nothing like official about it. I never read like the other book Rowling had written about the Fantastic Beasts and where to find them. Probably there is a description of Villa. I don't know. I'm not aware of it. I just invented this part. I made up this part because I don't know. I thought it could make sense and I liked it, and that's it. So, yeah. And I also wanted to say something else. This thing is clear when you read the text, but I'm not sure it's clear when I read it aloud. I mentioned this fact at the beginning, but maybe it's better to refresh the minds. Sometimes there are some of Harry's thought in it. Reading it's easy because it's another font, so you cannot mistake it for something he says. You understand that he's a toad. But when I read it aloud, I try to use a different tone, but I don't think it's always clear. But yeah, use that as a rule. If you think it's not something appropriate to be said aloud, it means that he is thinking it. Let's make this thing easy. And then I don't want to say this too soon, but I'm really happy about I'm reading this. The last week I was stuttering so much I couldn't say two words straight together, and now I'm actually reading decently. I don't know why. I've apologized. I realized that some weeks I speak English very badly indeed, and I read even worse. And sometimes it's alright. I don't know why. I don't know why one week is better while the other is worse. I have no idea why it works that way with me. But keep in mind that I write a lot in English, so I can write in an acceptable way as you are hearing it. But speaking for me is much more difficult, because I live in Italy and I speak Italian all the time. I haven't got English friends in Milan, and I only speak Italian in my workplace. I have no international interaction. So tonight it's actually the only evening a week where I speak English. That's why I'm keeping this live, because I know that many people that follow me on YouTube are Italian, and I know that it's very difficult that English people will come here and will listen to this. And even if they will do, they'll probably shut it down a second later because of my dreadful accent and my dreadful English. But it's still useful for me because I can speak English a little bit. Tonight is going well. I don't know why. I repeat, I have no idea why, but it's going well. So I guess we can carry on with chapter 38. I'm sorry, I need to drink a lot while I'm reading it. Okay. Chapter 38, where we will have a confrontation between Harry and Ron, which I very much like. I hope it will be the same for you. So, chapter 38. I'm glad you answered my feelings. Harry and Ron were sat at the opposite side of the kitchen table. From the window, Albus, who had re-emerged from his hiding place, and Rose were talking under the cherry tree with their grave faces, glancing nervously at the two of them now and then. James had joined them at first, but Harry had reminded him about being grounded, and scolding, he was back in his room, where the next second loud deafening music erupted from it. Harry decided to overlook it in the wish of not to be overheard in his conversation with Ron. A conversation he didn't want to have, but couldn't refuse. Ron had almost begged him. Although, now that he had accepted to hear him out, Ron was silent, and probably for the best. In Harry's point of view, there was absolutely nothing he could say or do to change the situation they were in. The clock was ticking and lightening even more the silence surrounding them. Harry was almost about to break it with a nasty remark when Ron spoke first. Harry, I thought very often about what to tell you in case I would endeavor you to hear me out. But now, all I wanted to say seems so weak. He paused, no meeting his eyes. True to be told, Harry didn't have an expression that invited friendliness, more a forbidding one to discourage any possible hope of reconciliation. Probably, I just want to appease my conscience. Probably, Harry snapped, interrupting him. But I promise you, there is not a day which I don't think about it. You are lucky, because for me, there is not even a minute, he interjected, irritation swelling. I don't know. Can I remind you there was an accident due to your wish to torture me, or perhaps even to kill me? And now I've got this guilt devouring me. Poor Ron! Must be dreadful! He mocked him nastily, passions running out. I'm sorry, Harry, I'm truly sorry. What can I do to make you forgive me? He burst out, forgetting his rehearsed speech under Harry's bitter remarks. He took his hand in his hands, crumpling on himself, losing the composure he was trying to maintain. His dejection had only the power of enraging Harry. He was as though, in everybody's eyes, Ron was the victim and he the torturer, while it was exactly the other way around. Why? Only because he didn't show his grief openly as Ron did, everybody thought he was the one to protect and to fuss over? Harry crossed his arms on his chest forbiddingly and stared at his ex-best mate. A part of him besieged to grasp this chance to make up and get him back, but it was an impotent part. The other had Lily written on it, and that couldn't be cancelled. This was the part that was dominating right now. Ron, I want to help you to understand, he said conciliatory. Ron halted and looked at him, his change of tone giving him a false hope. Let me see. How can I explain it to you? He said in deep reflection, and then smirked. Gotcha! And looking fixedly at him without dropping his smirk. Let's say that today, when I saw you and I was so enraged, instead of charging you, I would have taken out my wand to curse you. And just suppose that Rose, your precious daughter that you love with all yourself, decided she wanted to protect you. He paused as Ron was staring at him with round eyes, knowing already where he wanted to get. And just suppose that by mistake, totally accidentally, of course, I would have killed her in front of you. Ron's eyes teared up immediately under Harry's expression that had lost his smirk in favor of a profound malevolence. And you would know that you will never hear her voice or see her again. And we are speaking about your Rose, that you are so proud of, that you would die for, and that make you feel as though your life had been worth, despite everything you suffered in your past, all the struggles and affliction, everything had been worth. Not because you defeated the Dark Wizard, but because you have been able to create something so amazing as her. As he was speaking, his voice had started to rise unwarily. He stood up, throwing on Ron, who was still crumbled on his chair distraught. He halted, sensing this, realizing that he was somehow losing control, revealing more of his feelings that he wanted to share with him or anybody else. He then sat down again, taking a deep breath to cool down. Ron was aghast, his watery gaze fixed on him. Harry continued with a smile. Let's just suppose, for the sake of a chat, that she's dead by my hand. How would you feel? Ron gaped at him, blinking fast to drive away his tears. He let his head drop, defeated. I'd want to kill you, he admitted under his voice. Harry nodded. I'm glad you enter my feelings. And he was again with his back in front of the closed door. Ginny, come on! She was still in there. Ron's words hadn't sorted any effect. He was gone, and this time Harry hoped forever. He made his point, and Ron had finally understood there was nothing he could try to be forgiven. Ron had been wrong in looking for an exchange with him. He was too soon. Lily's birthday was too near. 7 months were too short a time to expect him to be over it. What has been reported in the interview had given him a hope that Harry had soon swept away, explaining the reason why he had reported what he did. And had also threatened him sternly not to try something so egoistic as to do himself in again. And if he did, he promised he would have gone to look for him in hell to kick his arse. And those were his parting words. They were gone soon after. Harry observed them from the window, Ron keeping Rose's hand in his own, and he resented him the possibility. But at the same time, he was sorry for his inability of forgiving him. He knew he would probably have felt better in doing so, but it was impossible. Would he change in future? Difficult to say. But right then, he needed somebody to hate. A person that embodied all he was wrong, all the faults, a scapegoat. Like Ron had hated him for no real reason before Christmas just to vent out his frustration. Now, in a way, Harry was doing the same. He was aware of it, but it didn't change much. The rancor was too great, the sorrow too strong. It helped him to have somebody to throw the fault on, not to throw it on himself. Therefore, he watched him separate, feeling relieved in having him out of his sight, feeling bitter in his resentment, but the lingering feeling, in the end, was dejection. Ginny, you'll have to come out sooner or later, he said, banging at the door. And it was probably going to be sooner. That room, unlike the one in London, hadn't any ensuite, and with the pregnancy, she was going to the toilet approximately every 30 seconds. It was a wonder she had lasted that long already. She was bound to emerge very soon. While he was planning to get in from the window, the door opened suddenly. Only his ready reflex prevented him from smashing his head on the tiled floor. Ginny stopped over him without a word, going straight for the bathroom. You'll find it locked. I've got the key. You'll have to speak to me if you want to get inside, he bellowed after her. No answer came back, and after a few seconds he heard the entrance doors bang. He hurried there, and from the window saw Ginny walking briskly toward the wilderness. He smiled. I could have chosen a tame wife, an accommodating, submissive woman that would have worshipped me as embodiment of perfection. Instead, I chose a headstrong, stubborn one. Too bad. As he caught up with her, she was crouching on the ground, ready to relieve herself. Ginny, talk to me, he entreated her. I explained you how it was. Ron did it too. You can ask Ted. He'll tell you the same. You can even ask James, for heaven's sake. It was beyond my control. She didn't answer, staring grumpily at the ground. Harry looked at her, who didn't show any reaction to his words whatsoever, silent and immobile, but at the same time she wasn't even doing what she was there for. Well, didn't you have to wee? He asked. I cannot if you stare at me, she muttered grudgingly. Harry sneered and crouched in front of her. I'll go away if you tell me that you know I'm not to blame. Pause. Reflection. I know you are not to blame. The necessity to wee was impellent, apparently. Good. And now that you love me. Pause. Reflection. I love you, she grunted grumpily. Very impellent. And now I want a kiss. Pause. Reflection. Reflection again. A quick peck followed as she returned to stare at the ground. Near explosion, basically. Very nice. And now I want you to tell me that I'm the handsomest as well as the best husband in the whole wide world. She pushed him in impatience. Harry, go away! She ordered. Harry laughed. Okay, I'm going. I'll prepare some dinner. You can come and use the toilet inside if you want. No, I'll do it here, she answered stubbornly. As you wish, he said conciliatory, walking back to the house. He found himself lost in a kitchen where he didn't know where anything was. He had to use Acho to find everything he needed to prepare some dinner. They consumed it under the porch, and Jimmy, after some steady attention and tenderness from his part, dropped her frown and regained her smile. James, however, was still in a grump of his own, and Albus seemed, judging by his appetite and unstoppable chat, the only one not having a word in the world, if not approaching puberty. That was the end of chapter 38. I hope you like the exchange between the two of them. I mean, between Harry and Ron, obviously. I think it went all right. I liked it. I liked it how I read it. And now there is a nightmare. It was a long time we didn't hear any of Harry's dream. And now there is one. And I must say, this one is one of my favorites. So let's go. I'm in a dark room. I've got a rope in my hands. Ron is in front of me, standing on a stool. He's speaking to me while I'm braiding a slip knot. You stole my family, he says while I approach him. You stole my sister, he states while I slit the noose around his neck. You stole my house, while I tied the cord over a rafter and I fasten it. You stole my wife, while I look at him in the eyes and I tighten the knot. You stole my life, while I kick the stool from under his feet. Intense. Okay, so I guess we can carry on with the last chapter of tonight, which is chapter 39. This chapter, yes, there is Luna coming, and I hope you like her and her role. But also, we are gonna talk we are gonna talk a bit about Harry's infancy. So obviously, in the 7 books, we all know he has been mistreated, but it has been reported in a very childish way, rightful enough, because it's a children book, it's a child book, especially the first and the second. They are really like they are for children, so they are expressed in a children's way. But because I read it as an adult, I could kind of see what was behind it, and it must have been dreadful to have that childhood, and I think it was very scarring in a way. And we are talking a bit about that in this chapter, and see what it could mean to have a family as Harry had, like uncle and the hound, how it could have been like for him for real. Let's see. Chapter 39. Men don't cry. The next day, while at Hogwarts, he was particularly surly and silent. Hermione knew the only reason of it was its being the eve of Lily's birthday, and didn't put too fine a point on it, deciding not to complain about his sharp answers and moodiness. He had woken up in the morning, troubled for the dream about Ron, and it had been difficult to ignore that the dreaded day was coming unstoppably near. The study had been incredibly smooth and productive, only because he needed something to focus on to divert his mind from his dark thoughts. He didn't allow himself any pause or distraction until the evening, not to let space for what was hanging over his head. When Hermione bade him goodbye, he was stiff, all his muscles rigid, in an effort to keep under control all was menacing to burst in him. She hugged him, but he didn't hug her back. The need of being left alone was starting to creep over him. She asked him whether he had any intention of coming to the castle the next day, and, for a moment, he had been tempted. He might have helped in keeping his mind busy, but at the same time, he was too afraid of his reaction in face of those fierce emotions he was sure to experience. Therefore, he refused, mumbling unconvincing excuses. So then, if I don't see you before the day after tomorrow, happy birthday, she said with a half smile, kissing his cheek. Happy birthday, Merry Christmas. All these positive adjectives in front of events that were surely not going to be as such for him anymore. His birthday had never been exactly fun for most of his life. When he was a child, the Dursleys never celebrated, let alone mention it. He didn't even know when it was until his fourth year of primary school. The teacher had asked everybody in class the date of it to be recorded on the calendar, and when his turn came, he hadn't been able to answer. He still remembered the distress of that moment when everybody snickered at him. He had hoped to make some friends, but he had quickly understood that it was not going to be. His minuteness, together with Glass's disgraceful clothes and Dudley's reign of terror, rendered it impossible. And after that episode, everybody started to think he was also dim witted or something. Even the teacher had smiled at him pitifully. That afternoon, he asked timidly to his aunt. She didn't answer. He irritated every time by him asking questions. But Harry felt it was a gap too big to ignore any longer, and, in the end, after some coaxing that costed him a few dinners and extra time closed in his closet, had obtained his answer. He was aware nothing could be expected from them, but with a childish craving for love, he had hoped for something every year. He hoped that, as foreseen, was always disappointed. Accustomed in not receiving much, he would have been already happy with them analoging it. But he had never been, and he had learned to harden against it, pretending not to care, not to face how unhappy he felt. When during his 11th birthday, Hagrid stormed into the shack where they were hiding, bringing the truth and a good wish, it was the first time for him to hear it mentioned by somebody. First time he got a cake, first time he got a present, first time he found out somebody cared. It had been his best birthday, and from then on, it wasn't a dreaded moment anymore. When he had managed to spend it at the Barrow had even been fun, and when not, it was still nice to know that he had friends who remembered about it. Although it changed again when he moved in a place of his own before the Fidelius charm. Together with the 31st of October and the day of Voldemort's defeat, his birthday became a bank holiday. That day was always, without exception, an inferno of owls dropping letters, presents accumulating in front of their doors, people coming and going wanting to make their best wishes. It had returned to be a dreaded event indeed. He had to flee from the house every time. Only with the Fidelius charm and then Lily's birth, he had really started to enjoy it again. But now was back to the dread was back to be dreaded, and nothing could change it. Harry, Hermione said, sensing his distress and rigidity. I'm okay, he answered hastily, forcing a smile and caressing her. But it was only a way not to be consoled. When at home, the gloom was hovering on the whole family. Albus was unusually silent, and James, in a temper, was looking for every pretext to start a row. But Harry couldn't allow himself to be provoked in such a moment when he felt already on edge. Therefore, kept his silence and as soon as it was possible, looked for solitude. He would have gone in the garden to enjoy the greenery that had always the power to quieten him, but unfortunately the pouring down rendered it impossible. The bedroom was the only place left for him that could guarantee the peace he was looking for. However, when bedtime came, Ginny was there, reminding him that he wasn't the only one to suffer and underlining his inability to be of any comfort to her. He longed to sleep on the sofa far from her irksome presence, but he didn't want to pain her with an abandon. Consequently, he kept his place on his side of the bed, all untangled in the effort of keeping everything scary and overwhelming down at the bottom of him. Ginny tried to get close to comfort him and be comforted, but that contact only exasperated him. Ginny, don't take it bad. It is not us. And he couldn't continue. And he couldn't continue the sentence, unwilling to refer to his behavior after Christmas. He resumed, don't take it bad, please. But I don't want to be touched. Leave me alone. He had said it. The same sentences he had used after Lily's funeral. Sentences that could only bring back the memory of something ugly. She flinched, and without adding another word, she turned from him, crouching under the duvet. And despite that was exactly what she wanted, and despite it was he who had asked for it, he felt forlorn. Another bad feeling to add to the pile. That night, he didn't get a wink of sleep. He was afraid of closing his eyes. He felt too agitated, and he was sure to get horrible nightmares if looking for a pause. Therefore, in the morning, when it came grey and dark, still full of rain, he was exactly in the same position as when he entered the bed. He was exhausted, but the irritation of spirit was keeping him from sleep. Ginny was gone from the room without speaking as soon light had started to peer in, leaving him to his gloomy reflections. He couldn't help to torture himself with the thought of what that day could have been if things on Christmas would have taken another turn. And it was maddening to think how little would have been necessary to spare his daughter's life. Him not going there, certainly, but also going there half an hour sooner, or being a few steps closer, enough to push Lily out of the way, or a few steps back, a word more or a word less. Infinite possibilities in which Lily didn't need to die. He found himself thinking at the mirror of her eyes again, and, for a moment, he was tempted to go and look for it at Hogwarts. But he had no clue of its hiding place. Perhaps had even been born in the room of requirement. He was anyway sure that the only person having the answer would never have revealed it. Dumbledore was aware of how dangerous that object was for him. Harry was sure he would have seen Lily in the reflection. Perhaps with the rest of his family, perhaps alone, but he would have seen her there smiling and waving, and he wouldn't have been able to walk away from it. He wasn't one of those happy people destined to see only the reflection while looking into it. He would have always seen her. But those elucubrations were only worsening his state. There were too many emotions pushing to get out, and no outlet, if no anger. He felt so similar when the day of the funeral he was sitting in the devastated kitchen immobile, a tangle of nerves, not daring to move, not to be triggered. And he knew that it was no good. He needed to do something about it, or at least not being close to his family in that state. He darted from the bed. A few hours had passed, and it was still raining hard, but the room was suddenly too small for him. He needed to be in the open air. He needed to run. It was too long he hadn't had the chance to do it, and rain or not, he needed to do it now. Ginny was in the kitchen, and it was clear she had cried, but Harry didn't linger. He informed them briefly of his intention and was out without waiting for a reply. Outside, the weather was merciless, soaking him completely after only a few seconds. The ground was covered with mud, which made it difficult to run. He was steady, however, for some time in his purpose, hoping that the physical exertion would dissipate the bile he was nurturing. But he wasn't. He wasn't enough. He got back when unable to run any longer, but didn't enter the house. He needed more time. He needed something that would allow him to vent out what was menacing to erupt from him without hurting himself or anybody. He sat on a stone bench in the garden, rain sliding on his drenched, rigid body. He was staring blankly in front of him when a yellow dot appeared from nowhere not far. He blinked, afraid his eyes were playing a trick. But no, the yellow dot was moving toward the house, and when getting closer, he realized there was a yellow dot with a white umbrella with black polka dots. And the figure, seeing him, instead of proceeding for the house, detoured to him. Hello, Harry. He was Luna, wearing a bright yellow raincoat, her long blonde hair braided with flowers entwined on two sides of her head. She was, like them, in her mid 30s, but perhaps for her quirky outfits or extravagant coiffure, she still looked in her teen. Is it not a bit wet for enjoying the outside? She asked, observing him critically. It's true, it is the perfect weather for moonfrog spotting. But you run the risk to catch cold without an umbrella. The last thing Harry wanted at that moment was having a ridiculous conversation with Luna. I'm sorry, Luna, but this is not a good moment for me, he mumbled darkly, hoping she'd go away without him having to resort to rudeness. I know, she said, sighing. As a matter of fact, I came for Ginny. I thought she could feel a bit under the weather. But then I found you here, under worse weather, she continued, smiling. He didn't reply, but Luna didn't budge, staring at him hard with her bulging eyes. You seem a bit stiff, she remarked in the end. Harry didn't reply to this affirmation either, but Luna didn't seem in the slightest offended or daunted by it. You must feel dreadful. I would, in your situation. It was a one way conversation in which Harry didn't want to have any share. I also think that if I were you, I would feel a lot of expectation on my shoulders. You know, all that thing about Voldemort and stuff. Here, another person that didn't have a problem in pronouncing the name. Probably, I would feel that everybody expected me to be very strong and not to show any weakness. She paused a second, in which Harry looked up, struck by her words. She continued, But you are allowed to cry like everybody else, you know, now and then. And those words had an effect on him. That was a way to let his feeling out. A way he hadn't even contemplated because it wasn't an option. Men don't cry. It's an unwritten rule, but nevertheless true. It was the same for every man, but it was even more real for him. He had learned very young that he wasn't allowed to cry. Even when he was really small, if only a tear would appear in his eyes, he was scolded bitterly by his aunt, mocked by his cousin albeit he recurred to it to have his way in any whim. But for him, it wasn't the same. Boys don't cry, she would always tell him, and the rare times in which he couldn't stop, she would just turn her back, leaving him alone. Growing, he had learned to prize solitude in the house. But when one is 5 or 6 years old, or even younger, loneliness is the worst. So he learned not to cry, and he learned so well that he didn't do it even when alone in his closet under the stairs. It didn't help. He didn't change anything. It was only a sign of weakness, something to make him confront with the misery of his situation. And growing up, he became part of himself. He couldn't show any signs of weakness because he had an important mission to accomplish. There were people counting on him. He had to take the lead many a times, and one need to have strength to do it. Whining is not allowed if people depend on your leadership. And once Voldemort was gone, he had Ginny and later the kids who counted on him for strength and support. He had indeed a lot of expectation to fulfill. He couldn't disappoint them like he couldn't disappoint the magical community. He must be strong. He couldn't cry. In 7 months, after he had wept in Ginny's arms that dreadful day after Christmas, he had only accumulated without letting anything out. Perhaps now it was the right moment to get rid of everything. His shoulders hunched and shook under the weight of those sobs the memory of Lily caused in him. The ache in his chest pushing out all those tears accumulated in months of silent sorrow that had slowly transformed in an armor of anger. Tears mingled with rain that pained and soothed at the same time. And at that moment, he realized one of the reasons why he hated Ron so much. Ron could express his feelings when he could or would not. Ron was more at liberty with them, while he didn't feel authorized in showing any. Harry envied him this capacity. Luna sat beside him, sharing with him her umbrella. She didn't try any ordinary consoling method. She only sat beside him, patiently, waiting for his tears to stop. And when it happened, and at his side, his muscle finally relaxing, she just said, I think we should get inside. It's not a good day for moon frogs, after all. And that was the end of chapter 39. I hope you like it. It was a kind of sad chapter, but there was Luna, and Luna cheers everything up. And I hope you liked how I characterized her. And yeah, I gave her a kind of a healer role for Harry's mind, which is what she did in the seventh book of the Rowling. I mean, she had always had that kind of task to help Harry's in dealing with emotions, because having had the childhood he had, not being able to let feelings out in any way, being mistreated, not receiving love, I guessed he would have had many difficulties in doing that. So yeah, he needed the Luna. Everybody needs a Luna. Come on. Um, well, I guess that's all for tonight. I hope you liked the chapters. We will see each other hopefully next week on Thursday at 9 o'clock here on my channel, like usual. And the next time we will have only 2 chapters, because one of them it's actually very long indeed. It will be a bit different from other chapters, because I don't know if you noticed, but Harry tends not to speak that much. His sentences are always short. He doesn't talk that much, but in that chapter he's gonna talk a lot, so it's gonna be quite difficult to read for me too, I guess, but we will see how we will go. And by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this first, but we are actually getting quite close to the end. We are gonna have next week, and then I guess 2 more, and book 2 is gonna end. So yeah, hopefully we start with the book 3, but not straight away, I'm afraid, because I still need to have it checked for mistakes, and I need to translate it too. So probably I get a break. I get a small break just to finish up everything, and maybe I'll just read. We'll just read you the first chapter, and then probably a month break. We'll see when we will get closer to the date. And that's it. I thank you all to have been here, and I wish you good night, and see you next week. Bye bye.